Eagles Entertainment.
The journey of the draft is driven by AAA. AAA Roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 25th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and we have officially finished our conference previews, getting ready for the 2020 college football season. If you haven't, you can go back and check the last 6 episodes. They're pretty evergreen. You can go and listen to the one from a month and a half ago, and it should still carry through for what we're expecting here in the 2020 season. Obviously, look, there's still a lot to be determined, right? I literally, as we're sitting here recording this, we're seeing reports that NC State, their opener may be delayed due to COVID-19 protocols at that school, at that institution. We're seeing new announcements every single day. So, all we can do on the show is we're just going to prepare as if the season is going to go off to start. We have start dates for pretty much all the major conferences, all the ones that are going to play. It's constantly changing. It's constantly evolving. We're just going to play it really as it comes here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. So the first kickoff could be just a couple weeks from now. So really what we're doing here on the show is this week, we're going to kind of take stock of some of the big themes around the top offensive players, kind of pit some guys against each other. We're going to look at some opt-outs, right? Guys that have officially declared for the 2021 NFL Draft. And then next week, we'll do the same thing on defense. That's kind of the goal here over the next couple of weeks. And then hopefully we're shifting into in-season mode here after that defensive episode now, just 2 weeks from today. That being said, if you're a big fan of the show, if you listen and you love the show, the best way you can throw us your support is to go onto Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating, and leave us a comment. If you leave a question, I guarantee you it will get answered if you put it on our Apple Podcast page. If you've got a mock draft that you want to get critiqued by our group, go onto Apple Podcasts, leave it in there, because guess what? We're doing that at the end today. We've got a mock draft from a listener who left it onto our Apple Podcast page. We're going to hit on that at the very end of the show in Draft Mailbag. So, best way to throw us your support. Go on, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. Greatly, greatly appreciate everybody. As we gear up for 2020, we've put in a lot of work. We've watched hundreds of players already between Ben, myself, and Dane. The best way to kind of throw us your support, just go on, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. That being said, let's get into it now. It's time now for some Draft Buzz.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
We're back once again here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA, our friends Ben Fennell, Dane Brugler. Guys, I've finished our conference previews, and so it's time now to just kind of hit the pause button. We're a couple weeks away, hopefully, fingers crossed, from the start of the college football season. Obviously, all the different conferences have different schedules and things like that, but it looks like we're only a couple of weeks away from the first real action kicking off. So I kind of thought, okay, today, let's look at the offensive guys that we talked about over the last few weeks and really just kind of get a sense of, pitting guys against each other. I've got a few questions I want to ask the group, and we'll all kind of chime in some different topics. We'll do the same thing next week on the defensive side of the ball. One thing we will do every single week moving forward is just kind of take stock of the guys who have officially opted out. And it's a little bit of a confusing conversation right now because, the NCAA basically gave players a free year of eligibility. And I know that there's still things that they're working out with that, but essentially, Dane, correct me if I'm wrong in terms of how I'm reading this. It seems like every player will essentially have to opt out of school and say, yeah, like I'm going to the NFL draft. Like I'm graduating and going to the league because the NCAA has said, yeah, like this year doesn't count. So if you want to stay for another year next year, you are very much open to do so.
In normal years, seniors, unless there's an injury or something during their final year, they've exhausted their eligibility. This year, every single player in college football, doesn't matter if you're a freshman or a senior or how many years you've played, every single player in college football has an extra year of eligibility next year because of this ruling by the NCAA. So along those lines of what you were saying, every player is going to have to declare for this draft. It's going to be really interesting to see how the NFL tracks it. If they just go, each team, each program has one representative, whether it's, whoever their NFL liaison is, to communicate that with the league in terms of, okay, we've got X amount of players who will be choosing to opt in, and there will be some type of deadline. But this is unlike anything we've seen before. So it will be really interesting to see how the NFL does it, because technically, if I am, the Detroit Lions and I'm working on all these players, I'm still going to study all the seniors. I'm still going to study all the draft eligible players. But when it comes to building our board and really getting down to whittling guys off our list and building things up in our war room, we need to know who's going to be in the draft. So it's not like a senior will have up until April and say, you know what, I'm just going back to school. There will be some type of deadline, whether probably in January. And then we get into, okay, what if these conferences are trying to do a spring season? So things are going to get really complicated. But with what we know right now, now things could always change because this is a very fluid situation. With what we know right now, no matter who you are, senior, junior, underclassman, you will have to declare for this year's draft.
And to me, the part that I still have not gotten a good explanation for this, how are each of these schools across all of the NCAA going to account for the influx of next year's recruiting class and all of those scholarships being added to the team? Because this isn't like monopoly money. Like, this is actual money that the university shells out for these players to be able to go to school. Like, it has to, that money gets paid somewhere. So how are these schools going to be able to afford, after not having this year's worth of TV money and ticket money and all that? It's going to be it's an interesting discussion. I'm fascinated to see how this plays out, if that can actually carry forward. I still have not seen a good explanation anywhere. And if anyone that's listening has seen it, please send it to me, because I have yet to see anybody write about this and get good answers. So with that being said, what we'll do is every week, the players that have officially opted out of the 2020 season, and I should say, have officially declared for the draft. So one player who has opted out of 2020, but is not really declared whether or not he's going to go for the draft, is Oklahoma running back Kennedy Brooks. We talked about him in our Big 12 preview. He opted out for 2020, will not play fall or spring, but did not say in that declaration whether or not he was going to enter the NFL. So we're not going to talk about him here. We will, however, talk about a bunch of guys who have said, yeah, I'm entering the NFL. We're going to start with a guy that we talked, by the time we recorded, I believe Rashad Bateman, the Minnesota receiver, had declared for the NFL draft when we had done our Big Ten preview. Dane, I'll come to you first. The impact, I guess, of a Rashad Bateman entering the draft and not, we're not going to see another down of him with the Minnesota Gophers.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily sure that we needed to understand what kind of player he is. He's very savvy, very route conscious with his steps, understands how to manipulate coverage and set up defensive backs with his movements. And he's got a little bit of juice after the catch, not a ton. I mean, he will make some plays if the runway is there, but not a big make you miss guy. Basically, you're hoping he's going to be a Michael Thomas type of player in the NFL. And he's not going to run really well. I would guess somewhere between 4.55 and 4.60. Not going to run super fast. And so, there are several really talented receivers in the NFL who did not run fast, from, DeAndre Hopkins and Michael Thomas and Keenan Allen. But all those guys are so proficient with their routes and understanding of how to play the position. And you think Rashad Bateman could be along those lines, but obviously it's pretty high praise to compare him to those types of receivers. So Bateman he won't be for everybody. He's going to be a really interesting test case with several teams, because I think not every team, with how their offense is set up, with the type of receiver they're looking for, it's not going to be a perfect fit for everybody. But in the right situation, I do think he can thrive at the next level.
Ben, is there anything that you would have wanted to see more from Rashad Bateman on the field? I feel like the stuff that we still have if you have any questions about, are stuff that it would get answered at a combine and pro day, right? And to me, I thought we saw everything we would want on the field.
Yeah, there's some transition from being a stud young guy on the team to being the go-to guy in the offense. And I'd like to see him without a Tyler Johnson out there, maybe pulling some coverage. And same thing goes for Rondale Moore, not playing last year after his prolific freshman season. I just want to see what it's like when defenses are starting to narrow in on him and knowing he's the go-to guy and not some unknown freshman off the scene. But just want to kind of take a step back collectively at the group of players opting out of the season and into the NFL draft here. These are a lot of kids from the 2018 recruiting class. And you have some guys with a lot of experience like Trevor Lawrence, 2-year starter, national championships, everything like that. You have the 1-year starter guys like Micah Parsons and Rondale Moore and Rashad Bateman. But then you have guys guys like Jalen Mayfield out of Michigan, who's a one-year starter, and you just haven't seen a whole lot. And then there's some guys like Ohio State's Nicholas Petit-Frere, who hasn't declared or anything, but these are guys from that same class that haven't played at all, really, that could essentially declare for the NFL draft without ever having a real resume in college. And it's getting to be a really interesting time period on, did you flash enough to get yourself sold to the NFL, or did you show too much maybe to give them things to poke and prod and rip you apart? And it's just a wide variety of experience from these guys. And some guys are multiple year starters and some guys have very little tape. And I just think it's really interesting, the diversity and experience.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of wanted to just focus on the guys that definitely said, yeah, like in their announcement, entering the NFL draft, because even a guy like Jordan Reed, the tackle from Michigan State, he was a senior, but he announced like, hey, like I'm going to opt out and I'm going to go back. I'm going to finish getting my degree. I'm going to be a grad student and I'll be back from Michigan State next fall. That option is on the table for all those guys that have opted out. And so to me, it's going to be very interesting. And you brought up Rondale Moore, Ben. He was the next guy I wanted to bring up. With him, the big question was, what is he going to look like after the injury, right? Because he missed a good chunk of the 2019 season. What was it, a hamstring? He had something going on, soft tissue, that we would have just liked to see another year of him. When he was healthy in 2018, I mean, he was one of the most dynamic players in college football. And so I don't think there's huge questions about his natural talent. It was more just like, all right, like, would like to see what you look like after the injury and if you're fully healthy. I don't know, Dane, if you had any other questions with Rondale Moore.
Well, it was interesting as I mapped out my top 50. I did my first top 50 for The Athletic, came out today. So hopefully people can check that out. And as I was doing it, I found Rondale Moore to be the toughest guy on my list, just where to put him. Because, you see the talent, but he's a guy that has not played over 2 years now, basically. He played first 4 games last year before his injury. You could tell, I mean, after the first 2 games, games 3 and 4, he just wasn't the same. And then obviously not going to play this year. And so there's obvious questions there. And we're talking about a guy that's 5'9", $180. So right there, that's going to make him not for everybody in terms of what they're looking for and with their scheme and their offense. So Rondale Moore is a really tough guy to peg. And, Jamar Chase is the top receiver. And then after that, there's a lot of discussion about who that number 2 receiver is. And I think it's just going to come down to what you're looking for, both talent-wise and scheme-wise. So it's going to be different for every single team. I don't think we're going to have any type of consensus in terms of, the top 5 wide receivers, but I do think Rondale Moore is in there because going from one of the best freshman seasons we've ever seen at the position to not playing the last 2 years, that'll be a tough pill to swallow for a lot of NFL evaluators.
And I'll keep taking a step back with all these situations and conversations. We're essentially talking about an 18-year-old we're evaluating on tape and then seeing what we're getting as a 20, 21-year-old into our building. And could there be a more turbulent time in young adults' life from 18 to 21 as far as changing mentally, physically, everything, going on in their lives and trying to figure out their lives and being an adult and being a professional? And I mean, it's just such a turbulent, unexpected evaluation when you're getting these young kids that you might not have seen on the field for 2 years. Like, what are you getting as far as the mental makeup, the physical makeup, his development and maturity on and off the field? There's just so many questions with these kind of age range players and the lack of experience.
And the good news for Rondale Moore in that situation is that all the word out of Purdue is that he is aces in those categories across the board. The next one, we're going to hit Wake Forest wide receiver Sage Surratt. And the ACC is playing football this year. The first 2 guys we talked about from the Big Ten, obviously not playing, but Sage Surratt saying, you know what, I'm good. I'm going to enter the NFL draft. Guys, what was your first reaction when you saw Sage Surratt? Were you guys surprised at all that he made the announcement, or what was the initial response?
Yeah, I was a little surprised because this is a guy that could have declared after last year, but he decided to come back to school. And so I was a little surprised that he decided to opt out, but, it's his decision. And he's a really interesting player because he's big and physical, former basketball player, former, do everything type of athlete in high school. There's some J.J. Arcega-Whiteside to him because he will create some of that late separation with his long arms. He does do an outstanding job isolating the football, finishing strong, the body strength. He'll force defenders to bring their big boy pants to get him on the ground after the catch. He can make adjustments on the football, but he's just not going to run very fast. He's not going to have an impressive 40-yard dash. And so there are questions about his ability to separate. But he is a guy that has body control. He has power, and he can play in the NFL. It's just again a matter of scheme and opportunity, and where he fits best.
And I thought honestly, like I talked about, with Rashad Bateman, we wanted to see, okay, what is he going to look like in shorts and a t-shirt? How is he going to test? I think it's more of a question with Surratt, and I think Surratt has those technical refinements that we want to see. Like he's got a lot of the things that I like about Bateman. Surratt's got that. It's just a matter of like that ability to separate. How much juice does he have? Combine the pro day, it's going to be huge for Sage Surratt and his overall evaluation, because the tape otherwise is very, very good. I would say there's another big receiver, guys, who also entered the draft and opted out, and that's Colorado State wide receiver Warren Jackson. This is a guy that's been on the radar now for a couple of years. I remember him first flashing when I studied Michael Gallup a couple of years ago when he was coming out of Colorado State. He enters the draft. We talked about him a few weeks ago, but Ben, I'm going to go to you first here. What were your thoughts in terms of Warren Jackson when you've evaluated, when you've seen of him, and ultimately how he can translate to the NFL?
Well, he was heading into his senior year, and this guy is a tall, long glass of water at 6'6", 220 pounds, with pretty good athleticism. He had a monster year last year with 77 catches, 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns. And we've seen the pedigree they've been pumping out of Colorado State with Michael Gallup and B.C. Johnson and Preston Williams and Rashard Higgins over the last couple of years. But this kid's been on the field for a good 2.5 years. He's shown enough tape. He was productive in the Mountain West last year. I think seeing these 2020 seniors deciding to come out is more than appropriate, especially guys that have been 2.5 year starters. I'm more than okay with a player like Warren Jackson coming out.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, he was, I have his verified measurements here, 6'05", 6'2", 212. So just a hair under 6'6", over 33-inch arms. The scouts have him listed as a 4.52 in the 40-yard dash, so pretty good speed for that size. So I think the raw measurables are what you want to see, and I think that there's still some more he could have proven with another season, but I understand why a player like this would be coming out.
Yeah, my big thing, he plays the ball really, really well in the air. He's got really natural ball skills. This is a guy that you can trust in those contested catch situations, all that. It was more kind of similar to Sage Surratt, that like, all right, can he separate at an NFL level? I just don't know if he's got the refinement that we've seen from Sage Surratt over the course of his career, but whole work vertical, you mentioned the 4.52 speed. He knows how to stack press corners and get on top and, kind of use his frame to his advantage. He's got great height. He's got a really muscular frame. I mean, he really looks the part. Only a 1-year starter, but has been productive throughout the course of his career. I'm interested to see what Warren Jackson looks like. Hopefully we'll see him at the Senior Bowl and whatever the Senior Bowl looks like here this offseason. All right, guys. So we've talked about a bunch of receivers so far, a couple of offensive linemen, one of which we did talk about in our Big Ten preview. That's Northwestern's Rashawn Slater. The other we didn't, and that's Michigan right tackle Jalen Mayfield. Now I want to start with Mayfield here, guys, because we did not talk about him in the Big Ten preview. Only a 1-year starter at right tackle, did participate at left tackle the previous season, so he's got some proven versatility. I thought he's a well-rounded player. I would have liked to see another year, and just see can he take that next step? But there's a lot to like there, Dane.
I feel 100% the same way. And I think this is probably a tough decision for him. He saw 4 of his teammates on the offensive line from last year get drafted in April. So he was going to be the only returning starter for the Wolverines on that offensive line. And everyone that I've talked to on campus from that program said the coaches just absolutely love him. Clearly a talented guy. When you watch his tape, I don't know, he leaves you wanting more. Like he's not quite all the way there yet, but he's getting there. He's on his way. And so I think another year would have been really beneficial for his long-term development and just becoming a more complete player. And so he's going to be a really tough player to project in the draft. I think you feel good about who he is right now. It's just, what is he going to look like next year? What is he going to bring to your football team for the 2021 season? I mean, do you think he can compete for a starting job? I just don't know that he's ready for that yet. And so he is a tough guy to peg. He just snuck into my top 50 at 48, 49, something like that, because I think the talent is there. It's not all realized talent at this point.
He was surrounded by so many seniors last year in that huddle. You mentioned those 4 offensive linemen, Shea Patterson. This is a guy that showed up to Michigan at about 290, played last year at 319. So a guy that's put on some weight, still learning how to be functional with that weight. Only a 1-year starter at right tackle. Fran, you mentioned those couple spot duties at left tackle as a true freshman, was really just in a couple games there. But a guy that's added 20 pounds in the last year and a half, just want to see more out of him on the field. I thought he was a guy that really struggled with some more athletic edge rushers, and he's more of a prodigy developmental player that he could end up being a perennial Pro Bowl NFL player. He's got that pedigree and that ability. He's just not there yet. But if an NFL scout or an offensive line coach sees the potential and sees the development, he's only 20 years old. He might be a guy to, that is a day 2, early day 3 player that you shelf for 2 years and then ends up being a nice player down the road. And we're going to have a couple players like that are maybe drafted a year or 2 early that aren't ready to go yet, but can still be very productive and potentially elite players in the NFL.
That was kind of how I viewed it. I didn't view him as like having a huge ceiling. Like I didn't see a guy that I was like, oh man, like this guy's going to go to multiple Pro Bowls and be just a glass eater up front, a guy that, one of the best linemen on his team. But I felt like he had a high floor because I just felt like you were checking a lot of boxes. Like he's not super powerful. That was the only real big negative I had in terms of like the physical tools, but solid athlete, solid feet. I thought he recognized things well up front. He had a solid anchor. I talked about the proven versatility. We've talked many times about how important that is along the offensive line. He plays with good pad level, good leverage. He understands how to surface blocks in the run game. Like I would have really liked to see just one more year, but based off not seeing another down, I think he's got starting potential. I think he could be a starter in the league.
Yeah, you could watch him in that bowl game against Alabama, some NFL-level defenders there, or even watch him against Penn State and Shaka Toney, who's a really athletic edge rusher. Sometimes Toney would get around it with his speed, but the second Mayfield got his hands on him, he would drive him 10, 15 yards down the field. But this whole conversation, I'm just getting worried about the upside potential of these young guys. And are we ever going to get into the conversation of a kid out of high school maybe sitting for a year, 2 years, redshirting, and not ever seeing the field in college and just getting picked off of high school potential and upside? And it feels like that kind of conversation with these 1-year starters from high school.
I've had that conversation with a few people over the last couple of weeks about the XFL and can the XFL go? I really don't see that as happening for a lot of different reasons. We could probably do a whole podcast on why. With the way that everything is built, the way that everything is constructed, it would be really surprising to see if we did go down that path. But one last guy I want to talk about. Dane, I know you're a big fan of Northwestern's Rashawn Slater. You talked about him in our Big Ten preview. You had alluded to the fact that he was the one guy who really stood tall against Chase Young last year, and I 100% agree. To me, we've seen this guy a ton already so far. A 3-year starter, his first 3 years at Northwestern. Is there too much more that we needed to see from Slater? I don't necessarily think so. But, again, a rising senior, Big Ten's not playing, kind of a slam dunk decision for Slater.
Yeah, exactly. He did not, unlike Rondale Moore and Rashad Bateman, he waited until the Big Ten unequivocally said, no, we're not playing this year in the fall. So he waited until that happened. Once that decision was made, he opted out. He said, I'm going to get ready for the draft. And I don't blame him. If the draft were tomorrow, I think he sneaks into round 1. He might as well start his draft prep now, play in the Senior Bowl, hopefully if we have one, and whatever the combine looks like. And there will be, I've talked to some scouts who think that he's going to have to move to guard or even center to make it in the NFL. But I mean, listen, if a guy like, Isaiah Wynn can stay at tackle, why can't Rashawn Slater? I think he has enough of what it takes to stay outside, even though he's going to get dinged for the lack of length. Obviously, that's not something he can improve by playing anymore at the college level. So not a big surprise that he opted out.
And just to paint the picture on what we're dealing with these prospects, Slater versus Mayfield, Slater has about 2,000 more snaps than Mayfield. Right. Yep. 2,700 career snaps. I can't count how many starts he has, but left tackle, right tackle, been on the field a ton. He's a guy that I don't think anyone was worried about seeing anymore in college.
38 career starts entering his senior season. So figured this guy would have ended his career with 50 starts if he had been able to play his senior year. Plenty of tape out there on Rashawn Slater. All right.
Am I crazy to think he's a first-round pick?
I don't view him that way, okay. But the guy that I wrote down as a comp was a first-round pick. I wrote down Laken Tomlinson, and Tomlinson was a first-round pick. I didn't see him that way, but I know there are a lot of people in the league that really like Slater.
It's kind of crazy, but he would be the first-round pick of the Fitzgerald era at Northwestern. which would be, Northwestern's obviously not known for pumping out a ton of NFL players, but I was surprised to learn that he would be the first round pick in the current coaching era, which has been around for a while.
I was just going to say, he's been there for a long while. All right, guys. So no Big Ten this year, no Pac-12. I wanted to ask you guys a question, and we'll do the same thing next week on defense. Let's each pick one offensive senior. Just want to go senior, not underclassmen here, from the Pac-12 and the Big Ten that we wish we could have seen play this fall, but won't, obviously, because of the conferences canceling the season. We'll say why. I'll kind of kick things off, and I'm going to go with the Big Ten. I picked Michigan wide receiver Nico Collins, and this is a guy, big, physically imposing kid. I'm not sure if we talked about him in the Big Ten preview or not, but I did enjoy watching him on tape. He can go up and fight for the football. He moves pretty well for a guy his size. He's not like an elite level athlete, but this is a big, strong kid. He uses his frame really, really well. Really looks the part. I'd like to see him get a little bit better as a route runner. That's the one thing I'd really like to see from him this year. But he goes up and he battles at the catch point. I love the way he attacks the football. Keep in mind, they lose Tariq Black. They use Donovan Peoples-Jones. What does he look like now as the real focal point? I mean, a lot of people felt like Nico Collins was the guy last year, but what does he look now as the real focal point going into his senior season? Obviously, a new quarterback situation there as well in Michigan. Would have liked to see Nico Collins line up this fall here, Dane.
Yeah, he's kind of reminds me a little bit of – they're different, but I really like Colin Johnson going into last year.
Okay,
and
yeah.
I see a little bit of that with Nico Collins. But Michigan had some pretty talented receivers last year. There were a lot of them were unproven, with Donovan Peoples-Jones, Tariq Black. But it was consistently Collins who stood out, very strong at the catch point. I think that, even though, Devontae Smith is the top senior wide receiver this year in this class. I think Nico Collins is too. I have him above Tylan Wallace. I've got him above, Marquez Stevenson, whoever else that you have in the top 5, top 6 of the senior receivers. I think Nico Collins is clearly the number 2 guy behind Smith. He's a good player.
Ben, who's your pick here for the Big Ten?
There's a number of directions to go there, but I'll tell you, if Nico Collins runs in the 4.4s like it's being sold on the freak list over the summer at 6'4", 220, he's going to be in pretty rare company there, and I think he'll easily squeeze in at probably day 2 off of those metrics. If we see guys like John Baldwin going in the first round and Dorial Green Beckham, and hasn't been a lot of projection to the NFL, but
that's not
we've
a
seen
bad
guys.
One.
We've seen guys lately.
DGB's not bad.
Miles Boykin, Chase Claypool, obviously getting a lot of draft buzz for their being 6'4", 220. But I'm going to go with one of these Ohio State Buckeyes because there's a lot of talent behind the scenes there, that starting unit. And one of these guys, Jonathan Cooper, 5-star, tons of upside, tons of potential. They were so excited to get this kid. He's really only been healthy for one season, only played in 4 games last year, had to take a red shirt, but he's a senior, he's a graduate, he's a captain. He's been stuck behind guys like Chase Young and Nick Bosa. Tons of potential, just needs to stay healthy and get an opportunity to not be stuck behind another star. And 2020 was going to be his opportunity to kind of be the guy on that line with some other veterans on that Ohio State defense that you don't typically see all those seniors. But Jonathan Cooper is a guy with a lot of potential, just hasn't been on the field a whole lot in his 4-year career at Ohio State.
Dane, who's your pick here for the Big Ten?
I'm going to cheat and say 2.
All right.
Chris Evans from Michigan, the running back.
Okay, sure, yep.
Missed all of last year due to an academic issue. Again, talking to Michigan guys, they think he's one of the most explosive players on the team. And
he
so
flashed as a true freshman. Like he was making plays.
Yeah.
I forget who the other back was that year, but he was the guy who really stood out on tape.
Absolutely. I mean, you see that home run ability that he has. Just leak out of the backfield as a receiver, whatever. Just get the ball in his hands, let him create. So I was really excited to see him back on the field, see what he could do. Then the second guy, Alaric Jackson at Iowa, who he had a lot of pub, Tristan Wirfs and Alaric Jackson, the bookend tackles for the Hawkeyes. And Tristan Wirfs, to me, lived up to the hype on tape, where Alaric Jackson, not so much. I mean, he leaves you wanting a lot more. And at this point, after last year being his junior year, you were looking at him as a day 3 player. And I thought, okay, he's going to need a bounce back senior year to get back into that top 4 round discussion. And unfortunately, he's not going to have that opportunity.
It's 2 good picks there for sure. I'm going to go to the Pac-12 here. For me, offensively, senior that I would really like to see was USC wide receiver Tyler Vaughns. And this is a guy, Ben, you and I both really like receivers that are built like this in terms of like how sharp he can be in and out of cuts, really great snap as a route runner, can play all three wide receiver positions, has shown that. I would have really liked to see, hey, with Michael Pittman gone, a lot of targets available in that offense. Obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown, another high-level target in that passing offense. They love to throw the ball out there. USC, obviously, in that scheme. Would have really liked to see another year of Tyler Vaughn's. And, to me, like, the biggest question I had about him was his ability to play through contact from snap to whistle. Like, I just wanted to see him finish a little bit better at the catch point when he's got a body on his back. If he's playing through contact mid-route, being able to hold his stem and still maintain that ability to create that separation. Would have really liked to see a little bit more from Tyler Vaughn's there, but this is a guy that I think has an NFL skill set for sure. Ben, who's your guy from the Pac-12?
Tyler Vaughn is just an interesting body type. He's 6'2", 185. So He's that tall, slender, lean frame that typically those guys are really loose and can get themselves open, but the play strength, getting knocked off their routes. I was just watching a kid from UCF, Trey Nixon, similar kid, 6'3", 180, really that type of basketball player body. But Tyler Vaughn's, he took ballet classes in high school. This guy is a really fun player, all sorts of trick plays, throwing the ball as well, returner, really fun player there. But I had a couple guys to pick in the Pac-12 here. I didn't know if I should go with some of the Oregon DBs or maybe Onwuzurike at Washington needs to produce, Frank Darby. I know I'm stealing names from Dane right now, but I'm going to go with Walker Little at Stanford. Only played in the one game last year, got injured in that first half of the Northwestern game. So he was going to come back, prolific player that's been on the field since his true freshman year. Just want to see where he's going to stack with some of the other tackles in this class. I know Penny Sewell is going to be OT1, but is Walker Little that next in line there? Can he squeeze into the first round? And really just want to see how he recovers from that injury.
You can talk about some of those defensive players next week when we cover these guys, Ben. Dane,
there we go.
Who's your guy for the Pac-12?
I'm going to talk about someone that Ben just mentioned, Frank Darby, who we talked about during our Pac-12 preview. N'Keal Harry with Brandon Ayuk last year. I mean, Arizona State has had that first-round pipeline at receiver, and I don't think Frank Darby was going to get to the first round. But with him being the guy, the top receiver on that team, I thought he could get himself into that day two conversation. You saw some of that big play potential last year when teams and defenses started to realize, okay, we need to double cover this Brandon Ayuk kid. Okay, Frank Darby saw a few more targets his way, and he answered in a big way. So not the biggest guy, but he runs well based off of what we've seen so far. He could be a better player than what we've seen. So I was disappointed we won't be able to see him anymore at the college level, and it makes his NFL evaluation a little tougher, but hopefully we see him at the Senior Bowl as well.
Full disclosure, real quick, Fran. I didn't know we were sticking to just offensive players here.
I mean, it was in the rundown. But
I wasn't going to say anything.
I can't be asked to read every word in these rundowns. It's really more of a skimming thing.
And Walker Little's technically a redshirt junior, so we're
I'm just breaking all the rules then. All right.
I wasn't going to say anything, but
then maybe I'm not so sorry for my Jonathan Cooper pick. Maybe I'll just be the renegade every week here. Right?
Yeah, I've come to expect that from you. But last question, just talking about the Pac-12 and the Big Ten guys, just for you guys, like inside baseball standpoint for you guys, has it affected your strategy when it comes to evaluating players for our purposes as we get closer to the season? Like, I can tell you, like me personally, I've kind of pushed the pause button on evaluating any Big Ten or Pac-12 players that have not officially opted into the draft or opted out of the season yet. Just because I'm like, all right, I'm not going to put any time into watching them until I know for sure they're going to be in this draft. There are hundreds of other guys that I can spend time studying. Have you guys taken similar approaches, or are you guys going like heavy into those conferences, knowing like, hey, I can watch this guy and put him to bed now and then not have to touch him again until April? How have you guys been approaching it?
That's a good question. I guess I'm just not ready to give up on the season maybe, but still there's like 1% hope that they're going to figure this out, but it's not going to happen. I mean, yeah, I think because you take a guy like Baron Browning, I'm getting ahead to next week already, but, Ohio State linebacker who needed this season to live up to the potential. I mean, I still want to do more work on him, but he might play in the spring. He might decide to go back for a fifth year because he does need that on his resume. So it is tough. I think it's I won't be doing as extensive work on some of these guys as I normally would at this point in the process. But I'm probably still going to whet my appetite a little bit and just at least make sure I have a base understanding of who they are.
I'm still trying to have a semblance of structure in my normal routine here. So my phase is I'm preparing for the season. So what that means is I'm all over the map and just trying to educate myself on the landscape of the teams, newcomers, stud freshmen, guys that were injured, transfers, and what's going on in college football. Not necessarily with the intent for the draft, but obviously the draft is always in the back of my mind and projecting forward. But right now I'm just trying to catch up with all the comings and goings heading into the 2020 season. Whoever's on the field or not on the field, it's really tough to keep up with. But it's really the Wild West right now as far as preparing for the next couple of months, what to expect, what to prioritize. I have no idea, Fran.
All right, so a few questions. I want to almost go rapid fire style. We don't need to spend too much time on each of these answers, but I want to get your thoughts on a handful of questions.
Don't cut us short, Fran. Don't cut us short.
I'm just hoping that you read the questions, Ben, but I will reread them now to get through it. All right, so Trevor Lawrence, Clemson quarterback. You may have heard of him. From Cartersville, Georgia, went to Cartersville High School. Same high school as former Auburn running back Ronnie Brown. He was the second overall choice of the Miami Dolphins back in 2005. As we sit here today, knowing everything we know and knowing that we don't know everything because of everything that's going to happen in the next 10 months, does Trevor Lawrence get drafted before his fellow high school alumnus, Ronnie Brown? So basically, is he the number one pick when it's all said and done, whether it's next year or the year after?
Yes, absolutely. Even if we see a team like the Bengals or the Dolphins or another team that's set at quarterback end up with that top pick, I bet we see a trade. Basically, I would be shocked if Trevor Lawrence is not the number one overall pick based on what we know right now. Obviously, injury stuff, if something were crazy were to happen. But based on what we know right now, I would be shocked.
We're going to have to find some skeletons in this kid's closet for him to get outside the top 5. But spinning this back to Ronnie Brown, how about running 4.43 at 233 pounds? I know you're trying to spin this to now and Trevor Lawrence, but don't change me, Fran. We're talking Ronnie Brown, Auburn. Huge height, weight, speed guy. 233 running the 4.4s. Impressive kid.
I just love how you went the extra mile with the Ronnie Brown info, but couldn't get the seniors on offense from the Big Ten and Pac-12. We'll move on.
I have my flaws.
While we're talking big name quarterbacks that are draft eligible, Pete Thamel from Yahoo Sports reporting that North Dakota State is going to take on Central Arkansas later this fall, basically a display game for the quarterback Trey Lance, who is going to be just a redshirt sophomore, 1-year starter last year. When you see that, Ben, what is your first response when you see that?
My first thought is, are they playing at Central Arkansas Stadium? Because that's the candy cane, silver, purple field.
I hope
so that could be the only tape to watch of Trey Lance here. So could be some chroma keying issues if you want to put some graphics on that field. These are the things going on in my head. Yeah, he's a nice player and all, but really the field colors are where my focus are at right now.
My first reaction is, what's the point?
Right.
I mean,
that's kind of where I was too.
If you're Trey Lance, you want to have one last hurrah with your teammates and go out the right way. And, I get it, but what do you have to gain from this? If his goal is to enter the 2021 draft. Now, if he has not made a decision yet, or, he's planning on going back to school, we don't know that. But if he does plan to enter the 2021 NFL draft, I don't see how playing in this game could really help him. If he does really well, guess what? He was supposed to. If he doesn't, say he just has an off game, then all of a sudden we're going to poke more holes in him. And then worst case scenario, he gets injured. And then all of a sudden he's not able to work out before the draft. So if he plans to enter the draft, or even if he's leaning that direction, personally, I would advise him not to play, but I get it. He wants to play with his teammates one last time. And so, I think that's probably his main motivation.
It almost puts a pit in my stomach to hear him say one last hurrah. This was a redshirt freshman last year. He's played 1 year. We're talking about last hurrah, sending him off. It's like, man, this kid just got started in his college career, but he had such a good year. It's like, okay, he's shown enough. Where's the next step? What's the next level? We get so excited about that potential and that projection. It's like, you flash once in your first game, I'm probably retiring as a college quarterback and letting the scouts just use that game to project in all my potential at the next level. It's just crazy we're in that conversation, but it's kind of the state of college sports.
To me, it's to what Dane said, like just as much can go right as can go wrong for him in that situation. It would be very, very interesting to see what the decision would be if he's going to enter the draft. Like, okay, like, am I going to play in this game? Or are they only doing it just for this purpose? Like it's interesting. It's very interesting.
I wouldn't want to mess up my interception streak as well. He has not thrown an interception in college football, and so I wouldn't want to screw that up either.
No question. We talked about Trevor Lawrence a couple minutes ago, and the first overall picks from the last 3 drafts. So Joe Burrow.
All lightning in a bottle, guys.
Yeah, right. Joe Burrow, 2020. Kyler Murray in 2019. Baker Mayfield in 2018. All 3 of those guys were not in Trevor Lawrence's shoes. They were not considered to be the top picks heading into their final seasons on campus. Both Burrow and Baker Mayfield were seen as like mid to late round choices. Kyler Murray hadn't even started a game yet in college. So it's a little bit of a tall order, but only a handful of guys that I feel like this could apply to. Do you guys feel that there's anybody who's got the best chance to try and approach that kind of meteoric rise? Is it even possible this year with all the circumstances being what they are with COVID-19? Ben, I will go to you first. Is there anybody that kind of comes to mind saying like, yeah, I could see this guy making a jump?
Well, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow. What's the trend of those 3? All transfers. New scenery, new coaching staff, new offenses. So I just feel for the guys that have, new teams. KJ Costello, Mississippi State, Jamie Newman, Jake Bentley at Utah. His career at South Carolina didn't go as planned. Can he catch that lightning in a bottle with a new team? Or even maybe an unsung guy like a Peyton Ramsey that played a lot of Indiana, now over at Northwestern. Sometimes it just takes that change of scenery, change of cast of characters, change of coaching for you to really hit your potential, hit your stride, have that one big season, and suddenly you're an NFL prospect.
Pick one, Ben. Is there one that you feel strong, like that you feel like, yeah, this could be the guy in this scenario that I feel like could make that jump?
I'm going to go with Jamie Newman, based off his height, weight, speed, ability, upside, arm strength. He has all the physical tools and physical makeup, I think, to be an exciting NFL prospect. Showed a lot at Wake Forest. Now down in the SEC, some different weapons on the outside, different defenses. If he has a big year in the SEC, he could easily slide in the first round, maybe, the front half of that first round.
Dane, who did you settle with here?
There are 2 guys that really stood out to me for different reasons. Kyle Trask at Florida. I think most people know his story by now, like not playing in high school because he was the backup quarterback, still found his way to Florida, comes in last season and plays pretty well. And so you figure the lack of on-field experience, and that's, Joe Burrow at Ohio State couldn't get on the field because he, behind JT Barrett, behind Dwayne Haskins. And so he goes to LSU and has a pretty average junior year. Okay, well, Kyle Trask couldn't get on the field in high school, was behind De'Aaron King, goes to Florida, finally gets on the field last year as a junior, has a solid year, not terrible, not great. Now, can he take that next step as a senior? I mean, obviously that's, a tall order to ask, but I think Kyle Trask could possibly do that when you consider his just lack of experience and the fact that he showed promise last year. And then the other player who, and I think he's got an opportunity here, Desmond Ridder at Cincinnati.
Ooh.
Who think about what kind of opportunities Cincinnati has this year. If we're able to play a full season, obviously SEC, ACC, Big 12, they're fighting now for those 4 playoff spots. Cincinnati has a program that could get one of those playoff spots this year if they go undefeated. And Desmond Ridder is the igniter of that offense. He's got the talent. It's just, can he be more consistent? Can he take better care of the football? Can he put it all together? Desmond Ridder could be that type of guy this year.
Ben, you and I were just talking offline about the Cincinnati Bearcats. You kind of went down a rabbit hole watching some of those guys this year.
Yeah, they have a really fun, nasty defense. They're really attacking. They also have a running back transfer, Jerome Ford, coming over from Alabama. So that Cincinnati team's got some talent on them, especially in that backfield with Desmond Ridder.
So to me, thinking about this topic, 2 names popped in my head. One of them was Kyle Trask, Dane. The other is the guy it was one or the other for me, and I feel like Trask is a better player than this person right now. The other guy that I'm talking about is Sam Ehlinger, and I feel like Kyle Trask is a little bit ahead of Sam Ehlinger right now. Mm-hmm. But I feel like Sam Ehlinger has the most room to grow. The more I watched Ehlinger, the more I really liked him. There's athletic. He's really tough. Like the toughness really stands out watching him in all phases of the position. Obviously, look, new receiving core. They've made some changes in the coaching staff, things like that. There are certainly some things that give you some cause or for concern. But I kind of like what I saw from Sam Ehlinger. It would not shock me if he were to make a big jump. Not saying I feel like he would definitely be able to make it, but of the 2 names that really stood out to me in Trask and Ehlinger, I felt like he was the guy most likely to make that jump.
Real quick, Fran, I think it'd be remiss I don't want to stick with the transfers there, but a guy that nobody in the country is talking about, and I'm saying nobody is talking about, but Mac Jones at Alabama. He's a good-looking quarterback at 6'2", 215 that had come in for Tua in several games last year. Doesn't get any love, any credit, did his job throughout the week, had to start on a short week as well. Really interesting player. Doesn't have a whole lot of tools to get excited about. I don't want to call him the game manager type, but we've seen enough of those guys that are accurate, smart, decisive, and have that poise. And this is a guy that's won big games in the SEC on the road for the Alabama Crimson Tide. He's going to be the starter this year. A guy that really nobody is mentioning as far as being an NFL type prospect, but you have a hot year at Alabama, maybe go undefeated, work your way into the playoff. Suddenly you're a prospect.
He was not in our SEC preview, right? So we didn't talk about him last week. We're returning 4 of the 5 offensive linemen to the starting lineup. Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle. You got that run game with Najee Harris. Yeah,
pretty nice setup for a quarterback there.
Yeah, that's a good situation. And offensive continuity for the first time in 3 years. The offensive coordinator, Steve Sarkisian, still there for year 2. Which
you have 4 seniors on the offensive line too.
Yeah.
This is a very rare veteran Alabama team.
All right, you've kind of swung me. I think I might like that pick there, Mac Jones. All right. I mentioned Najee Harris, and he would be a name that I feel like some people would bring into this conversation. Do we have a running back in the first round of 2021?
I will say yes. In my top 50, I had 2 players make it in the top 30. The only 2 running backs to make it in my top 50, and both were in the top 30 between 25 and 30. Journey Brown from Penn State and Travis Etienne at Clemson. I don't know that both are going to get in there. I do think one of them will get in there. Journey Brown reminds me a lot of like the Josh Jacobs trajectory where, different circumstances. Josh Jacobs was just kind of, part of a really crowded backfield and trying to get the touches, where Journey Brown, they went with more of a committee approach. And then towards the end of last year, he really became the feature runner in that offense. And so not having that Big Ten season this year, he doesn't have a chance to show that he could be the guy. He doesn't even have 1,000 yards rushing in his career, but man, that talent is so good. And so I do think he has a chance to get in there. Travis Etienne, we know what he offers. Hopefully we'll see him this fall on the field. And if he can get a little better in pass protection, be a little more consistent catching ball in the backfield, then I think he has a chance to move up a little bit. I think right now he's in the second round conversation, has a chance of getting that late first.
I don't say this lightly, Dane. Journey Brown has some Ezekiel Elliott type flashes at times, and they're very similar type body types as well, in my opinion. Just not an every down full-time player in that Penn State offense, like you had mentioned. Was excited to see that in 2020. No, we're not going to see that. So really interested to see what that does to his stock. And I'm just not sure I see a running back sliding in. I think this is going to be 2013, 2014, where we didn't have any first round running backs. Those were the second round Bishop Sankey's and second round Giovanni Bernard type drafts, where there's a handful of backs going in the second round, especially in 2013 with 5 second round backs there. So I could definitely see, Najee Harris and maybe Chuba Hubbard, and, maybe even a guy like Rakeem Boyd or somebody sliding into that day 2 conversation. But just do not see anybody in the first round really warranting getting drafted in 2021.
I think I'm more in your boat, Ben. I wasn't sure that any of the guys that I've done, and all cards on the table, I have not done Journey Brown yet, but I will say big fan of Journey Brown because of the name of the podcast. You got to pound the brand there for Journey Brown.
I'm trying to think of a guy that could really flash the upside in the pass game. Because that seems to be where the NFL wants that first round back, the Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I'm just not really sure. I don't know if Puka Williams has enough of a butt to be that early down back for anybody. Can Kylan Hill catch 50 balls at Mississippi State and show off the ability to run and contribute on third down? Made himself on the freak list 2 years ago. Some guys like that I'm excited about their prospects of the season, but just not sure if anyone's going to squeeze into there. Kenneth Gainwell, I think, is a bona fide day 2 style of player, but, with a hot season, anybody could slide into that first round.
Guys, who's the second wide receiver off the board after Jamar Chase? Not who we grade as the second best wide receiver, but who do we feel would be the second off the board if every player that's eligible were in this draft?
I think a lot depends on what happens this season, but I think I would lean towards Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, agreed.
Just because the talent's just so special. I mean, the way he can make guys miss, what he offers on special teams, it's not that different than like a Henry Ruggs situation, who was just so fast and such a special athlete. Jalen Waddle's got something special to him as well. And so if he can show just a little bit more details at the position this year, show he's growing and he's not just a gadget guy, that he's not just an athlete playing the position, that he does have some nuance to his game, then I think there's a good chance he ends up as a second receiver off the board.
After this guy stays healthy this year and catches 1,500 yards, everybody's going to want another one. And that's Hollywood Brown with the Ravens. And I'm thinking of Tutu Atwell with the Louisville Cardinals. Dynamic speed, dynamic vertical threat, horizontal threat as well, all that gadget stuff. I just think he's absolutely going to take off as far as being a darling in the eyes of scouts, and his ability with the ball in his hands. We've seen these types, go early in the draft. I think he's a little more refined already than a KJ Hamler that went in the second round this past year to the Denver Broncos. I think much more of that middle of the first round, right where Hollywood Brown went.
I feel like Waddle and Atwell, I mean, you're talking about both. The X factor being that lightning speed, right? And, just that dynamic ability that can be tough to find. We've seen the speed bump guys up the board. So even there are guys that are more refined. We've seen those guys that have been a little bit more refined, like a Rashad Bateman, fall down a little bit in favor of that raw speed. So I would agree with both of you guys there in that case. All right, last question I've got for you guys, because I don't want to keep it too long. Last year, we saw 5 tackles go in the top 20. The year before, in 2019, we saw 3 in the top 23. Do we match those numbers this year? Because it feels like Penny Sewell, obviously we know, lock top 5, top 10 if he were to come out. It doesn't feel to me like we're talking about any other tackles as a lock in the top half of round 1. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is there anybody else that we see as like joining those guys who are lock offensive tackles?
I don't think so. I mean, last year was so special at the position. This year I don't think it's going to come. I think on day 2 there are some intriguing names. But in terms of like a top 20 offensive tackle, Sewell, I think, could easily be the only tackle off the board in the top 20. Now, if we expand it to top 30, I think maybe Rashawn Slater gets in there. But even then, I think those two are the only two in my mind. Maybe Leatherwood can get up there if he shows more consistency this year, even though I think he's probably a better guard. Samuel Cosme from Texas needs to play better this year. I don't think he's quite in the top 20, top 30 conversation yet. I think he's on the outside looking in. And then a couple other guys that we're not going to be able to see this year, like Abe Lucas of Washington State. I think he's going to go back to school. Fale from Minnesota. He's a guy that needs another year of school before he tests the NFL water. So, Walker Little, who Ben talked about earlier, as a guy that's just unproven at this point. So, I just went through, I think, my top 5 or 7 tackles, and at this point, with what we know, I think Sewell is going to be the only top 20 tackle we see off the board, and then maybe Slater could get in there with him in the first round.
Cosme was the only one I felt like he could play his way into there. Yeah, and I thought that was the only one that I felt really, really strongly about. Ben, what did you think there?
Well, there's a couple of guys that always get that buzz right on the edge of the first round, like the Niangs, Josh Jones, Ezra Cleveland last year, that all slid in that day 2 conversation. And, I'm looking at guys like Liam Eckenberg at Notre Dame with a really strong year in his development. Can he squeeze into that 30 to 40 range? Or, even a Thayer Munford at Ohio State, who's a really talented player, needs to stay healthy and put together a consistent season. Can he squeeze in that same back end of round 1? Early day 2 conversation, but I think they're all kind of grouped together there. Like you mentioned, Abraham Lucas, Falele from Minnesota, all in that conversation to potentially go there. Another guy like Coy Cronk and Alaric Jackson at Iowa. You have strong, dominant years. You can move from that 3rd round into that fringe first round, and suddenly, hey, maybe a team really needs to tackle the back end of round 1. You end up with a Ryan Ramczyk, and you have a lockdown right tackle for the next 10 years.
That's actually the other name I should have mentioned was Falele, the Minnesota kid. I felt like is the other one that has that potential. It's a shame we're not going to be able to see him this year, and I feel like he would be smart to go back for another year and really kind of improve that stock. A guy that big and moves like that, and we talked about it in the Big Ten preview. Make sure you go check that out. Falele, very, very impressive physical specimen. Well, guys, we're going to do this again next week. We're going to focus on the defense. Thanks for joining us once again here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Excellent stuff there from both Dane and from Ben. And we're going to be having awesome shows, awesome discussions just like that every single week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
All right, well, I alluded to it earlier that we were going to hit on a mock draft from one of our listeners, and that listener was Pauly-G_77. Said, love the podcast, been a listener for years now. Always great to learn about these guys before the whole country is talking about them. Pauly, really, really appreciate you listening for as long as you have. He said he did a way too early mock draft. Let me know what he thinks. And this is for, I'm assuming it's for the Eagles. Now, looking at these picks, first round, Penn State edge rusher Jayson Oweh. We talked about him in our Big Ten preview a couple weeks ago. We are all very, very high on Oweh. High potential, high upside with this kid. Still some areas that he needs to clean up. Has never been a full-time player yet, really just a backup. So would love to see a full season. We talked about guys we would have loved to see a full season. He's an underclassman that I would love to see just go back for another year and let's see you as a full-time player. The physical tools are just really, I mean, they're drool-worthy. He is a really impressive physical specimen. But on top of that, the flashes as a pass rusher, really, really good. Would just like to see him really kind of round his game out and just prove that he can be a full-time player. Second round, 56 overall, South Carolina corner, Israel Mukuamu. This kid is long. He is a tall drink of water. I mentioned him last week on the SEC podcast. He's like 6'3". He's over 200 pounds. I was at a South Carolina game a couple of years ago when he was just a true freshman, and I was down on the sidelines during warm-ups, just kind of body typing guys and just getting a sense of how they're put together. And this guy, I wrote his name down. I was like, who is this kid? And he was a backup at the time, ended up becoming a starter at safety for the opener last year as a sophomore, then became a starter at corner for the final 12 games. He's long, but he's not a stiff. He can move pretty well. He gets in and out. He can run. He was a very productive player on the ball last year. I remember he had 3 picks and a touchdown against Georgia. Really impressive player. Really, really long. The teams that really like those big frame corners will certainly be attracted to Israel Mukuamu. Third round, 88th overall, Clemson wide receiver Justin Ross, who he is only falling to the third round of a draft because of the medical. We talked about the neck issue that was discovered this summer, ended up getting surgery. Fingers crossed, all prayers out to Justin Ross that he's able to make a full recovery, is able to live a normal life, and then return to the football field. Would be great to see. He is a remarkable player. You look at the film on Justin Ross, and this guy has the ability to be an absolute stud in the NFL. Quote-unquote number one wide receiver, whatever term you want to throw at Justin Ross. He is the total package. He's got some things to clean up from a technical standpoint, but skill set wise, really, really impressive player. That would be the only reason he would be in the third round. Otherwise, I mean, you're talking about top 15 type of talent, maybe even higher than that type of talent there with Justin Ross. After that, you get to the third day of the draft. A couple guys that I have not studied, but I kind of know a little bit about. You got Florida State linebacker Amari Gaynor. You've got Northern Iowa tackle Spencer Brown, who I know I've talked with. I have not done him Spencer Brown yet, but I've talked with some scouts that have been through there that are really, really impressed with what he can be at the next level. USC safety Tayanoa Hufanga, who I know Ben Fennell and Dane Brugler both have done. So make sure you go check out our Pac-12 podcast, our preview podcast from a few weeks ago, where we talked all about Hufanga and his teammate on the back end of that USC secondary. And then lastly, Clemson corner DK Kendrick, who I got to tell you, I would be very shocked if DK Kendrick fell all the way this far. Even having only played the cornerback spot for 1 year after moving over from wide receiver, his ability is through the roof. So even though, to me, he's a first-round talent who, if he never played another down and had to enter the draft, would probably go day 2. He is a guy with very, very high upside. So certainly some interesting names there. Pauly, you did your homework, man. Really good stuff. Thanks so much for leaving the rating, leaving the comment. We were able to hit on it here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Like I said, next week we'll be back talking all about some of the top defensive players in the country. Until then, we'll see you next week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.